This is the Big Fish Cares Podcast. Big Fish Cares Podcast. And here's your host, Benny Fisher.
Got a special guest today. He's part of my video team at the Big Fish Media Company. My buddy Jorge Coxaj from Port St. Lucie, Florida. He is a friend of Joe Rosen's, who was on an earlier episode of the Big Fish Cares podcast, and had a chance to work with him down at RoofCon and shot 3 days of video content with him. And I had more fun just getting to know you, buddy. How you doing today?
Thanks, man. I'm great. It's a nice chilly day out here in Florida, so feeling good.
What's chilly for Florida?
It's about 66 degrees.
I'm laughing because I'm in Pittsburgh, and it's like, let me look at my things. I haven't been outside yet. 30 degrees. Yeah, there you go, everybody. 30 degrees where I'm at. So I don't think anybody's going to be feeling too bad for Jorge. You know what I'm saying? 66, a little chilly, a little nipply, huh?
Had to bust out the warm sandals.
There you go. There you go. So let me ask you this. How did you get into content creation? Where did this love for video and creation come from?
It actually started when I was pastoring churches. I used to pastor churches in New Jersey, in upstate New Jersey, in straight up farm country. And I had the issue of the fact that my church was tucked away in a corner that nobody knew about, in the middle of places where you couldn't just go door to door. You couldn't, there wasn't these big events. So I was thinking, how do I reach more people? And I'm talking back in 2011, how do I reach more people and get to where they are? And that's when I got introduced to Facebook and YouTube, and I started dabbling with creating content for the church originally, and learning how to get in front of people's, screens on their phones, because I knew that they were already using these technologies, So that's how I kind of got started with it. I wanted to do it for the church, and get the word out there about where we were in this remote location. So
how big of a church? Like, how many people would attend on a Sunday?
It wasn't a lot of people. It was a small church. We had that first church. I started off with 3, and together we had maybe 200, 230, something like that.
Oh, wow. So you guys grew up pretty good.
I mean, we grew a little, not much. I mean, I was there for about 5 years, but the social media stuff really started to help, and we were, pushing that and getting better at it, because it took some time to really understand it.
Yeah, it's so interesting, because I feel like that's when I started. I think everybody, that's when Facebook started to become popular, 2010, 2011. Us early guys were on it then and starting to understand how it worked. All the older people were still afraid of it. All the business owners were still afraid of it. They still are a little bit. Yeah, definitely. They're still afraid of the camera, a lot of them. I think they're starting to come around to realize that social media is here to stay. Right. And then, they just have to get used to the more and more channels that are out there. But I have a similar story about content creation for me when I was going to church, and I'm a lot older than you, I feel like. So I was in the 90s, I was actually helping my church with camera setups and video. They were actually on live TV. So it was a big mega church. It was a mega church back in the day. There would be 3,000-4,000 people coming. And they had 5 cameras set up. There was some remote control cameras. There was a control room where guys doing live switching. Wow. And and there was headsets on. And I remember being a kid that was 15, 16 years old, and being just fascinated with just being inside that room, that camera room where the director was and all the people that were down there, and then the camera guys. And at the same time, I was also doing stuff at my at the school, right? They had a newsroom at the school, and we would do little broadcasts and stuff like that. And I remember editing video on VHS tape. My church had a 1-inch reel machine where it was actually film reel, and we would edit on those. So I've edited on that before. And I was always fascinated as a young boy with broadcast and media. And I looked up to guys like Bob Costas. I was a sports guy, so
Yeah.
And I always thought, man, like, cool, it'd be fun to be on front of the camera, but it's also just as cool to be behind the camera. Because it was just action packed and it was always something different. And it always seemed like there was some type of level of urgency. And I like that about it. I don't know about you and what your stories are like, but how like when things break or things aren't right, and there's like a panic and like you got to scramble around and try to get everything working. What was it like to get that kind of set up for the church, and how did they respond to that as maybe like a newer technology?
Yeah, so I was lucky, I guess. Because all the three locations were very open to technology and very open to like modern techniques and so on. So they weren't resistant at all. A lot of them were actually fairly young as well. We had board members that were in their 40s, and some of them even in their 30s. And mind you, I was in my 20s. So it was kind of like, hey, listen, guys, this is the mission. And the reason they bought in was because the bigger mission was bigger than the particular uncomfortableness they may have felt at the moment, where it was like, I'm apprehensive to new technology, but I know that we have a bigger mission, so we're willing to explore. And that was kind of the thing where it's like, well, we're willing to try it. We're willing to explore it. We're willing to see where it goes. So at first it was kind of like, well, we're going to spend a considerable amount of money because, now it's a lot less expensive to get into content creation. You have, cameras like the M50 Mark II that are less than $1,000 that you can get into an actual 4K recording camera, but back then it wasn't like that, so it was like, we're going to spend a considerable amount of money, but they were willing to do it. So I didn't get a lot of pushback in that regard, but, and some of them were even initiating, the different techniques and strategies. They wanted to do it themselves. So there was a lot of buy-in early on, which helped. So I didn't get a lot of resistance, but it was challenging because we had to figure things out. We had to figure out, how to live stream, how to because now again, and I'm going to say this a lot apparently, but now we have all of these things like Riverside FM, like StreamYard, like even Facebook Live. Where you can just go live without having to go through any paid intermediaries that will slow things down. But back then it was like you could go live, but we're going to show ads throughout your broadcast, and it was like it was complicated. So we finally figured stuff out, but it was challenging and exciting.
So you mentioned that you were a pastor. I want to go a little bit deeper on that. How did you become a pastor, and how old were you when you became a pastor?
I was 18. I was 18 years old.
How does that work?
So I went to school. I went to college, and I studied theology. That was my major in college. And still, like to this day, what I do is because of the pastoring and what I've embraced wholeheartedly, which is the preaching of the gospel. But back then, it was taught that when I was a teenager and when I was a kid in church, that we all had a mission to do. We all had a part. We all had something to bring to the table, and that we were all responsible. And that call to responsibility was big for me. It was a pivotal thing. I wanted to be responsible. I wanted to take up the charge and take up the mantle of something bigger than myself. And I found that in preaching and teaching. And so I thought, if that's what I want to do, the only thing in my mind at the time was, well, the only path to that is being a pastor. So that's what I did. Later on, I discovered that, well, you don't have to be a pastor. Like, you don't have to have a church to teach and preach. Especially now with YouTube and Facebook and Instagram. And so, but back then, that was the only path. So I went to school. I did my 4 years. I got my bachelor's in theology and pastoral theology. And I came back to New York, where I had a few friends that were in positions that could help me out, and they did. And I believe that God led me throughout the entire time to where I ended up in New Jersey with these churches. When I was 23 is when I finally started leading these churches. I started off with these 3 locations, these 3 churches, and it was pretty early in my life. So, you know, it was interesting.
A mature young man, and I'm sure that you had a lot of friends that you grew up with that probably went different paths.
Very different.
Yeah, it seemed like you had a good head on your shoulders. So tell me about your origins. Like, where did you grow up? Where were you born? What was your family like?
I was born in El Salvador, a country in Central America, tiny little place. But then El Salvador had been going through a devastating civil war for over 11 years. And we ended up fleeing the country because where I was born in Chalatenango, it was they called it the Vietnam of the Salvadoran Civil War. And I mean, there was bombs being dropped all around us. There was fighting up in the mountains. It's, you know, this volcanic mountainous area. And so my parents decided that the best course was to flee the country, and we did. And we came to the U.S. When I was 3. I was 3 years old, almost died in the trip because it was a very rigorous trip, difficult. And we ended up in Texas and then California and then finally in New York, where I grew up in Yonkers.
Well, I want to talk about that for a second, because that's not you'll be the first podcast guest that immigrated in this country. I feel like the old-fashioned way. Do you know that? I mean, your mom and dad tell you those stories? I mean, can you share some stories about how? First of all, I mean, I know you don't remember because I mean you were 3. Right. So
well, I do remember one thing. I do remember one thing. So part of the trip involved us being on boats, and we didn't come in the traditional route. We were eventually given asylum by the U.S. government and citizenship through that, through programs and stuff like that. But we came. Part of the trip was on boats, and the one thing that I do remember, I remember looking down at my feet, and there was like clear water, and it was like stony water, and looking out to a beach that we were going to be going into, and then my mom grabbing me by the shoulders and rushing me away. So I remember that. She says that throughout the trip we were given, it was weeks that we were going to be out on the trip, and there was 1 week that we had been given food for the week, and the food for the week was 3 sandwiches, and that was it.
3 total sandwiches for you, your mom, and your dad? Did you have any brothers or sisters with you?
My dad wasn't with us on the trip. He had gone ahead. And he was funding the trip. And so it was just my mom and I. She swam with me for miles on her back in order to get us to where we eventually got to shore.
Like, were you talking about swim, like from El Salvador water or American water?
No, we were in Mexico at this point.
So did you come up through Central America?
We came up through Central America through there were different points, there were different safe houses that we would stay in, and eventually, there was fences that were hopped there, allegedly.
Yeah. Yeah, so do you walk the whole time? Do you drive? Like, are you getting in vans?
No,
is there like a program that it's just like we know they know you're coming, that you come here, you meet here, then they go there. Is it secretive? Is it it's
very
open?
secretive. It's like and I can't tell you all the details because I don't know them, to be quite honest.
That's all right. I'm allowed to ask.
Yeah, no, of course. I don't think my parents knew them either. But they paid somebody, and then and it was logistically arranged to the T. Everything from you're going to go and you're going to get on this vehicle, you're going to meet at this waypoint, and then from there you're going to go to this safe house. You're going to stay there for 4 hours. You're going to be fed. You're going to be clothed, and then from there you're going to be able to take a shower, whatever it is. And then you're going to go from there. You're going to get in this car. It's going to come at exactly this time, and then it was kind of like if you missed any of the points, you're stuck. You're stuck wherever it is that you were, and in whatever condition you were. If you were caught at any point, you'd be sent to wherever they felt like sending you, or you'd disappear. It was just there was a lot of stories around that where families would just disappear.
What year was this?
We're talking 1990.
Wow.
1990. Yeah. So, 1990. So we end up getting here like that. So from there, it was kind of like, okay, so this leg of the trip on the boats, it was like, you're going to be on the boat for a week, and it wasn't like a big, ferry, a yacht.
It wasn't like a cruise ship.
Like, it wasn't a cruise. It was just a boat. It was just like a rowboat, and then we're going to be on the boat. We ran out of water. I was dehydrated completely, and we didn't know at the time, but it was like, my family grew up in the volcanic mountains, and we only knew fresh water. We didn't really know too much about the ocean, and so there was water all around us, and so somebody's idea was, give him salt and water, give him water. That messed it up even more. I mean, I passed out. They thought I had died from dehydration.
Wow.
And eventually I came to, we were starving. We hadn't eaten 3 sandwiches for a full week. So it was a rigorous trip, man.
Man, I feel like I should be interviewing your mom.
Yeah.
Like, holy cow. Wow, yeah. That's an amazing story. You should interview your mom and dad, and you should get that. You should make like a little documentary, like get them on tape talking about it.
I've wanted to do that.
That's a great story.
I wanted to get them on tape, and I've also wanted to go back to Guatemala, where my father's from, and get do somewhat of a documentary, because there's still a tribe there. It's an entire village that has my last name, and they live there, and they've lived there for centuries. They don't speak Spanish, they don't speak English, and they live in huts. I mean, it's incredible. So I'm really, that's one of my bucket list items, to go there and shoot a documentary on that, for sure.
Wow, man, that's amazing stuff. So you started out overcoming adversity at the age of 3. And then you get into the States somehow, and where did you guys ended up settling in New York, you said?
We settled in Yonkers, New York. We ended up in like upstate New York at first. So we lived in Chappaqua and Mount Kisco. It's a long way. It's a long way from El Salvador. I mean, why not just stay in Texas or California or Arizona? Like, what? Tell me, why New York? So we didn't know. Like now, like my father lives in Florida now, and one of the things I remember him saying was, when we got here, he said we didn't know the States at all.
Right.
We just knew wherever people landed, and we would go wherever there was work, wherever people would hire us. So we ended up in New York because my uncle and my grandma, who had gone before us, they had a house that they had purchased there. And, very, very hardworking people, obviously. And so that was the point. The only reason we ended up in New York was because they lived in this place that we could all
connections,
live, together. And because there was work there, so we ended up in this tiny little town in upstate New York. And we lived there for a while. Then we moved up to Mount Kisco, to the Chappaqua area, and ended up in Yonkers after that because my uncle ended up buying a building. So a lot of it was driven by my grandma and my uncle. They were kind of the pioneers.
Okay.
And so wherever they moved, the entire family moved with them until everybody finally got independent enough to spread out and diversify.
Yeah. Well, you guys become Americans, and you could become American, and you're like, oh, I want to go do this. Oh, I want to go do that. Like,
right.
It's probably it doesn't take long to become Americanized, right? And figure out wow, this is the land of opportunity. Yeah. We can do whatever, right? And
especially when the second generation started growing up and they really understood the language, they were indoctrinated, I guess, by the culture. So, we grew up in the schools, we went to the schools. In the school that I went to in Chappaqua when I was in elementary school didn't have anyone that spoke Spanish. I was literally the only Spanish-speaking kid, and they were very nice. They ended up creating an ESL program for people like me, and I learned English because of them. So, it was definitely challenging, but at the same time, this country was very good to us, and we're very thankful for it.
It made you who you are today. What kind of work did your mom and dad do back in the 90s when they came to America?
Yeah, so my dad worked as a security guard for Procter & Gamble.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, at a factory location. He worked night shifts, doing security guard work, and then my mom, she cleaned houses. So there was a family. So politics aside, the Clintons have a house in Chappaqua.
Okay.
So my grandma was their housekeeper.
Wow.
For some time, yeah. And the only reason that we ended up there was because before them, we had cleaned the houses for years of the people that owned the house before them. And so and that was it. The business was my grandma and my mom would clean houses. My mom also worked at Dunkin' Donuts, and she worked at medical facilities as an assistant to the nurses and stuff. So
that's so fascinating. How'd she get the job working for the Clintons? I mean, like, how does that happen? The Clintons just they call somebody they know and they say, "Oh, hey, like, I know some Latinos that want to come clean houses," and then I'm just trying to imagine how this happens.
What was
right?
the pitch? What was the pitch like? So no, they bought the house from a family that we had been working for years. And it was kind of like, oh, well, then who cleaned your house before?
Oh, yeah. So it's kind of like, who's your lawnmower guy? Like, who's your house cleaner guy? I got you.
Right.
Okay.
So we just kept that account.
Yeah.
And my grandma ended up working for them, officially until she retired.
How many years did she work for them?
I'm going to say at least 10.
Wow.
She worked for them
and they probably weren't there the whole time, right? They were probably just, they were probably in and out. Is this back in the 90s?
This is back in the late 90s, I'm going to say.
So this is while he was still president
2000s.
then. I mean, he was president until 2000. So, I mean,
after that. So it was after that. It couldn't have been the 90s.
Okay, because from 92 to 2000, Clinton was...
So they retired to Chappaqua. Yeah.
Yeah, well, that's how she probably became senator, right? Because she had a residence in probably New York, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So that's when we were
fascinating.
Yeah, pretty cool, man.
You got some stories, brother. We gotta get grandma. We gotta get grandma on tape, man.
Not my grandma. My grandma, she still lives in New York, and my mother does too. My mom and
we gotta get those Clinton stories, man. That'll be good. That'll be good TV.
Yeah. We have a few pictures. My best story is that I watched television. I watched Dragon Ball Z, which was a show that I love to watch, in Bill Clinton's living room on his big screen TV.
Yeah.
So
was Chelsea ever around? Because Chelsea's a little older. Chelsea's my age, I think.
Yeah, she was. I mean, my grandma cleaned her room, and she was around more than Hillary and Bill.
Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah, that's wild. Now, let me ask you a question. Did they treat your grandma good?
I was just about to say that they gave her health care. They treated her very well, very, very well. My grandma had no complaints. I mean, the Secret Service was a little bit, challenging because there was so many protocols. But
yeah, of course.
But they treated her very well. She was very happy there, and she only stopped working there because she couldn't anymore at that point. She was too old.
Yeah. So if Bill and Hillary just ran into your grandma walking by the street, they'd be like, "Hey, what's up?"
They would recognize her. They would know her by name. Yep.
Yeah, it's that kind of I mean, I had a house cleaner one day a week, and I would run into her every once in a while, and I feel like if I saw her, I mean, she hasn't worked for me for a couple of years, but if I saw her, I'd be like, "Hey, how you doing?"
Yeah.
That's a really cool story. I'm sure they had probably tons of help. They probably had tons of help, right?
Yeah,
they probably had a person for everything, right? They probably had I don't know. I'm thinking if I was the Clintons, they probably had 35 people there, trying to clean up for two people.
Yeah, I mean, she was the only one that cleaned the house.
Yeah, of course. But they had probably landscapers. They probably had tree guys. They probably had, somebody to go get their groceries and their food. They probably had a chef, right?
Absolutely.
It was probably a big old, community thing. And
yeah,
and then they always had people over because I'm sure the Secret Service was always hanging out. So and I'm sure that they probably had parties at the house, I would assume.
Yeah. I mean, I didn't know any of that stuff because at that point I wasn't around. I wasn't in the country.
I watch movies, man. So I'm just assuming the rich and famous. This is what they do, So
yeah.
Wow, what a story! That's so cool, man. That's that is a good American story, man. Of how a family left a country, and I was I was with a YouTuber that's an influencer in the roofing industry, Dmitry Lipinski, and he is, they escaped, I think Siberia. His brother had just come over from Russia just like recently, to flee having to go to war. Yeah. And you hear about these immigrant stories, right? And I'm a big fan of Gary Vee, right? And you hear about these people fleeing a bad situation, coming to America for something great. And you're obviously been in America your whole life, let's just call it that. And you have lots, all your friends are American, and you watch TV, you see what's going on, and a lot of us, sometimes we don't realize how good we got it, even when it seems like it's bad out there. So what do you say to that? Like, what do you say about the American dream? Is it still alive?
This is the best country to live in for sure. I mean, this is not, I love my heritage but I wouldn't move back to El Salvador. If somebody were like, oh, do you have a choice? I do feel like I have a choice, but I wouldn't move back. I mean, this is the land of opportunity. This is the place to be. It's where I raised my family, where I met my wife. So I don't know where I'd be. A lot of the people that grew up around me ended up fighting in the war and dead, because there was just massive, massive casualties in that war, or if they survived, ended up getting involved with the MS-13, with the gangs that are now that took over for a while. I mean, now they're being really controlled, but that took over for a while.
I'm assuming that part of the country kind of probably controls all the drug traffic from South America to Mexico, right? Like, I mean, I'm sure that's part of the pipeline. Like,
I'm not sure. I don't know, but
I would just assume, right? Like, I mean, they got to. If you're going to do it by land, right? You got to come up through. They come up through all those little small countries in Central America, right? I mean, they
have to be part of the network for sure.
Is El Salvador, the last thing I've heard about El Salvador was that they were actually honoring Bitcoin as like a currency, like in their country, which I found that was really interesting because their monetary system's very weak and very corrupt. Yeah. And do you know anything about that?
So I know that you can buy a pupusa with Bitcoin.
A what?
A pupusa. So a pupusa is like
what's a pupusa?
If you haven't had one, you have to have one. It's a traditional Salvadoran dish, and it kind of looks like. Have you had an arepa, like a Colombian arepa? Have you had a Mexican tortilla?
Yeah. I've had an empanada.
Empanada. There you go.
Empanada.
So an empanada is similar, but the pupusa is made with corn, and instead of just like regular flour, so it's corn. And then it has stuffed inside, so it's like a stuffed empanada with, they put it's a kind of salad, like a cabbage salad and then a tomato sauce, so like a spicy tomato sauce, a cabbage salad. It's a little fermented and spicy, and then you have your empanada, your stuffed empanada, so to speak. And that's like the traditional dish. So like if you were to go to El Salvador, you could pay for that, like street food, with Bitcoin, which is pretty amazing.
Yeah. That is wild.
I can't do that here in Port St. Lucie.
No, you can't do that. Yeah, no, they don't even know what Bitcoin is. Everybody's got right now with the market crashing the way it is. Nobody likes anything. Nobody likes the dollar. Nobody likes Bitcoin. Nobody likes stocks. There's nothing that's happening if you pay attention to the news. Like there's nothing that's happening that's good right now. So. Right. How do you keep yourself motivated? And you're such a positive guy. You're so full of life and energy. I think that's why I was attracted to you right away. Because I like to hang out with people like that because it fills my cup. How do you stay like that?
I'm driven by my calling. So I know that my mission in my life has a purpose, and part of that purpose is to do as much good as I can while I'm here, and to lead other people to the knowledge of Jesus Christ. Like that's what drives me. So I also focus on what I have and what I can be grateful for, because there's so much that that comes my way and that happens. And, business is business. So business can get very difficult at times, can be very challenging at times, fires to put out and all of that. But I focus on what I have and what I can be grateful for and my mission. I don't deviate from that. That's my calling, and that's where I'm going. So,
Mark, what is it? Mark 16:15. You know that verse?
Yeah. What's Mark 15:16?
Go into all nations and preach the gospel to every living creature.
Yeah.
And we can do that now. We don't even have to fly there now, right? You can use social media, right?
Yeah.
Hopefully, now they obviously have to have it on the other end, but it's getting easier, right, to be able to communicate those things, and you don't have to necessarily be a missionary or a pastor. Like you mentioned, you thought pastorship was the only way to lead people, and I will tell you, I found a calling as an entrepreneur to where you can have that same type of effect, right? Where you're leading people.
Yeah.
And, in business, sometimes it's tough, right? Sometimes it's tough to talk about God all the time. Sometimes it's tough, because, we live in America, which is great. But the other side of America is like, hey, we respect everybody's, different religious beliefs and different things. So we can't, walking around, thumping them with the Bible all day. Even though most of them probably need it, right? I grew up Baptist, so it was very, very in your face, very strict, very.
I know that, yeah.
Very, very upfront, right? Like it wasn't very passive, right? Now, and I know that I also had some family members that grew up Catholic. I know that Catholicism is a very native to the Hispanic culture. Tell me about those differences between, like, what is, more relationship with Jesus in Christianity versus Catholicism, where there's a lot of rules and regulations, and tell me about the differences between both, and tell me what you believe.
Yeah, well, Catholicism came up a lot earlier than other denominations, and these Protestant denominations spring up from the Protestant Reformation. But the reality is that, the path to Christ or God will use any of these methods, right? Or any of these places to lead you to the truth. And if you have a hunger for the truth, it doesn't matter if you're in the Baptist church or in the Catholic church or, in a Methodist church for that matter. If you hunger for the truth and you want to know, you truly want to know, and you have questions and you don't stop asking questions, then you're going to get answers. The Bible does say knock and the door will be opened, ask and you will receive. So it's like, that's what happened to me. I grew up in the Seventh-day Adventist church, which is also very strict, kind of like the Baptist, because
everyone's got rules, right? Like, why do all these religions got lots of rules, right?
but rules are interesting because you have to ask the question. A rule is a boundary, right? And it's kind of like a house. Like if you put boundaries around a house, there's a reason for it. Like there's something you're trying to keep out which is why you put up a wall, right? Or you put up these boundaries. So it's the same thing with rules in churches. And, I've always asked myself the question, like, okay, this rule is here. This rule exists. But what is it that it's trying to protect the people from? Why is this boundary set? And I think that provides me a better scope as to what the mentality of the people were, what they were afraid of when setting a particular rule, and what it's supposed to help you with. But yeah, there's a lot of rules in different churches.
I feel like that all came from the Old Testament when there were so many laws, with the Jewish people in Israel, and I feel like everybody just it was all these commandments, and it was all these don't do this, don't do that, and I think in a society like ours now, it creates you put the wall up. Sometimes if you put the wall up, how do you then get your message out to the people that are on the other side of that wall, right? Like, and how does all that work? I mean, I know a lot of people try to figure that out and struggle with that. They say, would Jesus go into a bar and witness to somebody if he was here today? Or does the person at the bar have to come find Jesus at church? Like, where is that mix at?
So that's where I step in, where I feel like part of the issue with church is it's very focused on itself. A lot of churches are very self-focused. And it's part of the reason why they don't grow. A lot of churches in America have less than 100 members, and they're not growing as much. Church growth is kind of like inflation. If you're not growing, you're dying,
Mm-hmm.
So, because it's kind of like a tree. If you look outside and a tree is not growing, you don't look at it and say, oh, okay, that tree's doing well. Like, that tree's obviously not well. It's sick somehow. So the church needs to do a better job to go out there and reach people. And I do believe that Jesus would go into the bar to get that person that is lost. Because, there's a story about it. The Bible says that there was a person that had 100 sheep, and one of them left. It left the corral. It left the four walls of the church. And the shepherd doesn't stay in it, like calling it out for it to come get it, to come back. He goes and he looks for it, and he finds it. And he doesn't find it in a good condition. He's got to pick it up. It can't walk back. It was in bad shape. He nurses it back to health and brings it back to the fold. There's an active part that God is taking in this story. He doesn't stay passively. So I do think that God goes out and looks for people. And I think that technology is giving us that opportunity to reconcile people with God, because they could be at the bar and see a video that we put up. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
It's on their phone. It shows up on their feed. They watch it, and that could be that moment that they needed, that connection.
That says, man, like, I got to stop spending as much time here and go spend more time with my family. And just so everyone that's home that's listening, I don't want you to think that I think that there's anything wrong with either one. I want you to know that, like, just because we use the bar as an example is just trying to, like, church, bar, try to, it's polar opposites of community, right? And kind of the things that happen in those places. But I do think that we need to do a better job, everyone, of being more open and accepting of, people of different backgrounds, because I think we don't deploy enough empathy, because there's a reason that people live different lives. I know I've been on both sides of the fence multiple times in my life. Mm-hmm. And I've overcome a lot of adversity. What about you, man? Like, it sounds like you had a good head on your shoulders ever since, like, forever. Like, have you ever, like, experienced any type of adversity or any type of, like, times in life where, like, you weren't always on point?
Yeah, man. I'd like to say I used to pretend like I had more of, like, a rough background than I did. I was very much, there was a point in my life where I wasn't. But that was just a product of growing up in Southeast Yonkers, in a ghetto in New York. It was just it wasn't the best upbringing. So I did join a gang when I was in high school. But just to give you an idea of the kind of gang that it was, we were called the Pretty Boy Soldiers. So
yeah, I want to hear about that. I want to hear about the Pretty Boy Soldiers. Is that like a sounds like a little clique? I don't know if it sounds like a gang.
Clique. It was a little clique. It was all it was, a little clique.
But you wanted to be you wanted to be tough, man, right?
I wanted to be tough.
You called it a gang.
So we called it a gang, and we got into a few fights to show off. We had initiations, we'd beat each other up. It was silly, but
kids stuff.
Right. It was more just a group of guys that
were you stealing stuff, selling drugs, like doing
none of that.
Doing nothing bad, right? Just
nothing like that. They'd get together because they wouldn't even invite me because I was still going to church, So
oh yeah,
they'd be like, "Oh, we're gonna go."
Yeah, you can't hang out with the church kid.
They'd be like, "We're gonna go hang out. We're gonna go get high at so and so's house." I'd be like, "Oh well, I don't smoke, so I have church today." And so that's just to give you an idea. So it wasn't as bad as it sounds. Because if you say, "Oh, I joined a gang," it's like it sounds like.
Oh yeah, I'm thinking like you're getting tattoos. You got to go out and put a hit out on somebody. Like you're running the number. I'm thinking like Tony Soprano. I'm thinking like I'm trying to put all those things together, and I'm just thinking like
no. We were a group of friends. It's all it was. There was no blood in, blood out, anything like that. So that was the craziest thing that I did. But other than that, it was pretty button tight. My family was very strict, and part of it was we lived with fear because we ended up getting like legal papers when I was a teenager. I was like 15, so we lived with a lot of fear, and it was kind of like, don't do anything stupid because then all this effort and all this work that we've put to come here and to do all of this, to give you all, because that was the whole thing. Like, that was drilled into me as a kid. It was like, we busted our behind to come to the United States. We've sacrificed things that you wouldn't imagine to give you a shot. It's not even for us. Like, it's to give you a shot.
Right.
Don't screw this up. You know, it was like, that was just the ongoing message. Don't screw this up. And I, you know, that for me, it was loud and clear. And it was just like, I didn't want to do anything to screw that up.
You're a good kid, man. I could tell. I mean, as soon as I met you, I knew there was something special about you. I feel like God, and now that I hear your story, I'm like, I feel like God chose you specifically to have that exact story, to have that exact messaging.
Yeah.
The life that you've led, the things that you've seen, how to overcome, to get to where you are at now, and to be able to then tell people, especially of your culture, right? Especially of, you know, the Hispanic culture. They can see somebody that looks like them, talks like them, and they can see the light through you. And I think that's a blessing, man. So I mean, I'm glad to get to know you. This has been fun. Let me ask you. Let's see. What other questions do I have for you? I have. I got questions. I'm trying to think of, like, how are you, like, what's next for you? Like, what are you, like, I know you're shooting content. I know that, you know, you do a lot of stuff for the real estate community in Florida, and I know you do some events and stuff like that for me. But what's next? Like, I know you're doing some stuff on social media too.
Yeah, so right now I work with realtors primarily, and that's kind of where I've zeroed in. But really helping people understand social media and creating content, YouTube channels, podcasts like this one, and different vehicles in order to get content and messages out there with content marketing. Like, that's kind of where I'm working now. But all of this is to fund my ministry and preaching, you know, and teaching. So that's kind of like what's next for me is achieving what I've been working at for all of these years, learning video, learning marketing, learning social media. You know, it's getting the gospel out, you know, in using this as a vehicle, and kind of changing the way that we do church, you know, because church right now is kind of like, it's this centralized thing. You go to a location, you belong to this denomination, and, you know, this is where you go, this is where you gather. It's your social calendar, it's your everything. It's all in this one building. And but I feel like there is so much more that can be done if we could just do church anywhere we were, and we had a mobile experience almost that was all collectively and shared. And so that's what I'm trying to create. I'm trying to create an online place, an online space where you can have content, share the gospel, learn, connect with God, connect with other people. And so that's what's next for me.
So it's like a virtual church experience, because I grew up thinking like, and I still actually do believe that church is the people, right? Not the building.
Right.
And
exactly
I do know that it's gotten distorted, right? Because we all have our own ways, and we have like control, and we're all humans, right. And the people that run churches are humans as well. But I do think it's important, to have a place. Maybe this is because I'm old school. Have a place to where you can worship, and have a building to where people can go to and feel safe, right? The safety of the building, the feeling that you get when you walk in, right? Because there's a lot of people that need to escape their home to go to church for that to be immersed inside of that message, right? And so, I do think that you can do. I think it's both, right? I think right. That you have to have the building, but I also think that you can have that virtual church experience. I think a lot of churches are online right now. I think that they do a bad job of just broadcasting the message, and then that's it. Like, people don't connect. Like, it's not like a big Zoom room. Like, where if you had a big Zoom room and you could see all the faces that were like watching church, it would feel more, you'd feel more connected maybe. So I think that would work if you could create an experience like that. I went to a Tony Robbins event a year ago, and I saw some things that he was doing since COVID, to where he does these virtual like experiences, right, where he's got monitors and cameras everywhere. He can see all the different people's faces, and I think that I definitely think with the technologies there to be able to have more of an immersive virtual experience. So I think that's kind of cool that you're trying to lead the way on that.
And I'm not thinking or, I'm thinking and.
Right.
So it's not
that's a Gary V thing, and not or. Yeah.
Right. It's not a do church this way or that way. It's kind of like, let's do church this way and this way, because despite the fact that there are hundreds of thousands of churches, there are still hundreds of thousands of people that don't belong to any of those churches, and there's still even in our town. I was talking to somebody, and they were like, the biggest church here has 5,000 people that attend every single Sunday, right? 5,000 people. And we look at that and we go, wow, that's a lot of people. But there are 300,000 people in this town. So what percentage of 300,000 is 5,000? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, like 1.6% maybe.
And that's the biggest church here in Port St. Lucie. So how many churches are there,
Yeah.
Let's say that all of them together had 15,000 attending members, right? And there's still 300,000 people. So 15,000 out of 300,000, we're not even at a quarter of the percentage of the town. So you understand what I'm saying? So whereas
there's still market capitalization, there's still market share to grab.
There's still market share. Whereas Facebook has 2.8 billion people on the platform, so it's like, there are people going to churches and there are people that prefer building, and great. Awesome. Do that. Go. But there are people who need a little bit of encouragement, and maybe they work with us first and then get connected to a brick and mortar place. You know what I'm saying? Maybe we're a bridge that connects them to a brick and mortar, but they start with us. So
you're the gateway.
The gateway, right?
Yeah.
But we're pulling from wherever it is. We're going like Jesus out into the mountains, out into the looking for their sheep. We're doing that work so that the churches can do their stuff and their thing. So that's kind of where I think that God is positioning us in terms of the digital space and creating online spaces for people to find their way, and working with the churches locally to show them the rest of the way, basically. So,
have you ever thought about hosting a church service on Twitter Spaces?
I've thought of several online spaces for services, but I'm not sure that I want to focus so much on the service aspect of it, because I feel like nowadays it's churches are services primarily.
Yeah,
and not so
where
much
it's like
churches.
Music, announcements, preaching, music. Hey, see you later. Have a great week.
Right. I want more community and service.
That's
because
good.
I feel like Jesus, that was his thing. His thing was, it's a community, it's learning, and it's service. We're doing community, learning, and service. Whereas if I flip the model, right, the model that is currently had right now is basically a service first, and then it's a community, and then it's learning. So, I want to flip that on its head and say, well, first it's a community that's learning and
that's
serving.
Good. Yeah.
And then we have service as well.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. A lot of churches have community events, but it's only because they had the church first, and then they were able to support the community events. Now you do the community stuff first, and then you get them into more of the traditional. It's kind of interesting.
And then maybe our digital stuff grows to such a point where we have events in communities, and then that's the service.
And then we'll put the goggles on and we'll be in the metaverse, and we'll have church in the metaverse.
There you go. I've actually looked into that too.
Yeah. Well, I had my 8-year-old just ask me, he sent me a text. He's like, Dad, I know what I want for Christmas. I want an Oculus 256 gigabyte. I'm like, oh boy, here we go. The metaverse is coming. Yeah. I want to switch gears. I want to get a hot take on something. I hope you don't mind me asking a tough question for you, but I'm very interested. How do you feel about immigration, and how do you feel about that? Like, talk to me about what your feelings are, because being a Hispanic American, coming over the way you did, obviously, not getting your papers until a lot later in life, right? what do you say to people that are trying to get to America? Like people in Cuba that are just like, try to swim over here. Like, people in Mexico that are just trying to sneak across the border. Like, tell me about what a guy like you thinks about that. Because I'm so interested.
I think that the rhetoric is inflated. I think that there's a lot of, and this is the thing that we don't realize about, political parties and politicians. And it's kind of like, people are going to say whatever they have to say in order to gain the fellowship that they want. It's like, it's not about what's true or what's not true. It's about whatever they want. So it's kind of like you should be weary of any politician's message. It doesn't matter which party you're in. So that's A, right?
Just like you should sometimes be weary of any pastor's message, right? Like,
100%.
You should lead with your own heart, right?
100%. The Bible should be your guide, period. So as far as like, I don't know any rapists and murderers that immigrated to the U.S. personally. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like, out of the people that came with the wave that came with us, it was just families. Families that were trying to flee a war that was so bad that it was better to take the risk of dying on the way or even dying in this country, because it was possible that you'd survive. Whereas if we stayed in the Vietnam of the Salvadoran Civil War, we would have definitely died.
Yeah.
It was
you'd rather be in an American jail than in the warlands of El Salvador.
Because it was a sure thing. Like, the mass graves were a real thing. The fact that people were disappearing left and right, that people were dying because bombs were being dropped. So here was the thing: since we were up in the mountains, they couldn't get up there. It was so fortified that the guerrillas that were attacking, they couldn't get up there, right? So what they started doing is just bombing it, just bombing it out of just whatever, just bombing the crap out of it with the planes and stuff. And so people, like, it didn't matter who they were hitting. It didn't matter. They didn't care about killing civilians or any of that. So people were dying left and right. And it was kind of like, well, if we go on this trip, there's dehydration, there's starvation, there's possible abduction and human trafficking. There's very much, you could face the danger of rape and all of that. And murder even, but it's all possible, not definite. Whereas here it's definite. There's going to be a bomb that's going to fall on you. You're going to die,
So let me give you the flip side of that though. So, we got this, nice community, which is got this nice community in America. Are we just supposed to accept everybody? How where's the line? Where do you draw the line of like, being able to, how do you support that? Like, because obviously, yes, our true hearts would say like, yeah, everybody come on over, but then that would obviously create some type of economic instability to a degree.
Right.
Or is that just me being programmed?
Well, I guess the question to that would be what kind of economic instability?
When so like if you have, let's just say you have 10 people that have $10, and all of a sudden 10 more people all of a sudden come into that community and have to live and work and create and stuff like that. Like, when do you draw the line of like, all right, we can only handle so much right now, because if it's too much, like, right, like it's just not, it's gonna stress out the system, right? So, and again, I'm just thinking of it in a small, because I have to think small, because I can't even imagine hundreds of millions of people and like, all the stuff that actually happens. But like, how do you how do you have a sense of community? Because at the end of the day, like, would you just open up your house and just like let 25 people move in and like start supporting them?
Right. There isn't a lot of support that was given to us in ways that were like, we didn't have insurance. We didn't have.
But if you got sick, though, what would happen? If you went to the doctor, what would happen?
We didn't go to hospitals. Like, if if
you got your arm cut off, guess what? You're going to go to a hospital.
Then you have to go to a hospital.
But you're going to go to the hospital. But like, do you think did people die? Do you know Hispanic Americans that died because they refused to go to a hospital?
I don't know any personally, but I've heard stories. You know,
but is that because they just like were afraid to go to the hospital? Because I mean, I feel like I've never heard of a. I mean, I don't know. Maybe I'm naive too. I could be naive. That's why I'm asking you these questions, because I'm on the other side of the fence, right? Like I've been here my whole life. I've been, the media's, obviously, I only know what I know, right?
Right.
But like if you walked into a hospital, I feel like they're not going to, send you away if you're sick.
No, I don't think they would, and that would be one of those things where it's like, well, yeah, that's true. But as far as I know it, immigrants that are undocumented and that are living here in the U.S. will not seek out medical help because they're afraid of getting deported. So they won't go to a hospital unless they're like you said, they got their arm cut off or something like that.
Yeah, but today though we're I don't know. I mean, I could be living under a rock, but I mean, I feel like we're pretty soft on that. I feel like hospitals are, the lady at the hospital. And even the most police officers, like they're not like saying, "Oh my gosh, like we're going to send you." Like they don't have time for that. Like,
yeah, but they don't know that. So you're right. Yeah, right. That.
It's like this imaginary fear on the immigrant side, right? Like they just have this fear, right? Because they hear the propaganda, like, "Oh, we're going to just send all these people back," but like, at the end of the day, like. Everyone's just an employee somewhere. like we're all just like we're all just like employees of like. Like I'm not gonna die on my sword to send this immigrant back. Like I don't have time for that. Like who's gonna do it? Because we're compassionate, right? Like we care.
It's true, and if there are people that are they are actually not, they're doing crimes, they're coming here, and
right? Of course,
committing crimes. They should be sent back. Like that's not the kind of thing that you want in a country. So I don't know how much of the economy is negatively impacted by immigration. I guess you would have to study that to really understand that.
I can't imagine it either, to be honest with you. Only because you could say like, hey, if they're starting to go to our schools and stuff like that, I mean that obviously that's an expense. But as far as like true. But they also work, and they also work for a lot less. They
pay taxes. They buy in the supermarkets.
Right.
They buy in the stores.
They're spending money.
They're spending money. They're stimulating. So, there's a lot of money and a lot of work being done by undocumented people that.
Yeah, because documented people don't want to do the work, man. I mean,
it's for the price, So it's like, okay, I'll go work, right? I'm a citizen now. You come and you talk to me, and you're like, all right, I want to hire you for the day. I'm going to be like, well, it's $300 to hire me for the day, right? Whereas if I ask somebody that's undocumented, it's like, I'll give you $20. Where are you going to get something like that? You know what I'm saying? You're not. Right. You're not going to find that any. So, and
I'm sure the Clintons didn't overpay your grandma.
Well, actually, they paid her. They paid her well.
I know, but listen, I'm just always curious, right? Like, because it's interesting. They didn't have the Molly maids over though. They could have hired Molly maids. See what I'm saying? They could have hired Molly maids, but they didn't.
They hired her instead. And I don't know. I mean, we didn't know anything about politics back then at all.
Right? Yeah.
All we knew was these people are my grandma's employers.
Yeah, the president of the free world, right? Like the leader of the free world. Yeah,
oh my gosh,
it's fascinating. It's a fascinating story, and the more I talk to you, the more I just think I don't even know what to believe. I really don't. I don't have a hard line stance. Like I'm not one of these people that oh gosh, it's got to be that way. If they come over, we're going to just send them back. I just have too much. I have too much compassion for people. At the end of the day, that somebody's going to be like, "Are you just going to let them all move into your house?" And I'm like, I don't know, but I'd probably try to figure out how to spread them out. Maybe I get one, maybe somebody else gets one.
Right.
But I can't imagine being in a war zone though, and having to endure that though.
Right. And nobody's asking. We weren't asking anybody to let us stay for free.
Too much pride, right? Yeah.
Right. I mean, we're. I mean, you see me now. You interact with me now. I'm no different than I would have been had I grown up there in terms of my intellect and my thought process. And sure, my culture has been shaped by New York and everything I saw there growing up. But it doesn't take away from the fact that. These are people. These are just regular people, and we need to see the subject from both sides of the spectrum and say, you know, we need to have compassion and understand that those who are saying we can't just let the door open for everybody, they're right. You can't just let the door open for everybody. You know, I wouldn't leave my house unlocked at night. You know, they're right about that. You know, and the people who are coming in to the country and literally fleeing devastation, it's like, where are they coming from and what are they running away from? You know, so
and they have value to give. That's the other thing. Like they want to give value. Like they understand that. They're willing to do whatever it takes.
Right.
Like we got young punk kids, and like shoot, we're probably raising some of them. like they're not going to work the way that we work. Right.
And you know, here's the thing. You want to follow the law. Right? That's the right thing to do. Right? And you want to enforce the law. And you want to do the right thing whenever it's possible for you to do the right thing.
Some of these laws that are created out of fear, though.
Right. But
way back when, right? So
you got to ask yourself the question at some point, and it's like, you know, the people that are coming in, what is the reason why they're coming in? You know, are they actually dangerous people, or am I just feeding into my fear?
Right.
You know, and then it's like, also, if you're coming in, you need to by all means or by all attempts possible try to come in legally. Obviously, you know, like there are laws in place for a reason. So I see both sides of the argument, you know, and it's kind of it's interesting for me because I get to see the argument from both sides of the spectrum because I came in the way that I came in.
Yeah.
You know, and I had no choice. I mean, I was only 3, but
right. Yeah. It's not like you decided that.
I didn't make that decision.
But you would though if you were you right now, because how many kids do you have?
So I have 4 kids. I have 2 foster kids and two biological kids.
And right now, if like Florida broke out in a civil war, you would be coming to Pennsylvania for safety, and
yes.
you would be like, big fish. How do I navigate up through Georgia and Tennessee and all the states to get here? Right.
And here's the thing. Here's the thing, Benny. You'd probably be, because we've had interaction, and say that our relationship had deepened even more.
Yeah.
You'd be in a quandary because you're like, I don't want to let people into Pennsylvania, but I know Jorge.
That's my buddy, man. Like,
he's got 4 kids.
He's got 4 kids.
So it's like, whenever we think about, I remember I was watching a video from Jordan Peterson, and he was talking about how in the Holocaust and everything that happened with Germany, and he wondered, like, what would it take? Because he says most people just went with it. He's like, because nowadays we look at that and we say, oh, I wouldn't do that. I would stand up and I would do something about it. And he's like, no. Most people went with it. They just went with it.
Yeah. Once the majority starts, you don't want to be the guy that is the weirdo that's like, oh, I'm going to fight.
Right.
Like, nobody likes to be the innovator.
Right. Even when it was wrong. So he was like, what would it take for me to be to do that kind of thing? And it's like, if you've never been in a situation where you're literally facing the real threat of death to you and your family, it's like you don't know the kind of things that you would do. It's like, I would never steal. I would never steal. But if my kid was starving, would you not steal a piece of bread? Is it wrong? Yes. Everybody says it's wrong. But if your kid was dying from hunger,
that's also wrong. That's also wrong.
Right.
To let your kid die, right?
Right. So,
but I mean, I would challenge that and say, is stealing the only way to do it, or can you go and say, hey, I'll do this for you if you do that, right?
Right.
So,
and that's the better way to do it,
because that's called work, right?
Right. You go and you work. You go and you work for it.
Give value. You go and give value.
Give value, and we believe that, and we live by that because we pour in value into the community. I mean, I put hours of content out there for free. And this podcast that you're putting out, it's to benefit the community as well. So, there is that aspect of it. But what I'm trying to say is that the point that Jordan Peterson was trying to make is that we're not too far from the people that we sometimes criticize. Because
absolutely.
they're just humans after all. And And I've seen it time and time again where it's like, I know that I would never do that, or I would never go there, or I would never partake in such a thing. And then, but part of it is because I've literally never faced a situation that they're facing.
So
and it's
good.
easy. It's easy to look at the soccer game or the football game or the baseball game from the stadium and shout all the things that they need to do, you know?
Yeah, Monday morning quarterbacks.
Yeah.
This is this podcast right here that we're doing today. I don't even know what number we're on, 43, 44, 45. I can't keep up, but this is why I started this podcast, right? You know, it's called The Big Fish Cares for a reason. I really care about people's stories. I care about interactions. You are, I think, the first, one of the first people on my podcast that we kind of went deep on as far as like, you know, different ways of life, different values, because I didn't grow up the same way that you grew up. And I want to learn more about it because I need to understand it more. So then that way I can, like, you know, try to figure out my viewpoint. Does that mean like, oh, I'm going to be all the way left or all the way right? Like, no, but like, it's called common sense, right? And I think that us sharing our stories and us being able to have intelligent conversations, regardless of our political views or whatever we think, right? You know, you are living in the greatest state, though, in the union. I will tell you that, by the way. I am jealous. I'm jealous. I am jealous of that. I will say that you are living in the promised land of the promised land, right? So, like, if America is the best country to be in, to me, Florida is the best state in this country. And from everything I know about like where you live, like in Port St. Lucie, like it's also very affordable. It's very nice. You know, there's no inner city. Like there's no like crime. Like it's like, you know, I know my boy Joe Rosen picked it for a reason. He's a pretty smart guy, and he's been all over the world. Yeah, and seen some bad places. But I really appreciate you being on here, man. I appreciate you being open and honest, and I know that I can pry and ask some tough questions, but I think it's good because I think that like people like me and you, we can break down that stigma. We can build the bridge, and I want to know that you're appreciated. And
thank you.
I ask every guest 5 questions, kind of rapid fire. So imagine that you're completely by yourself. You got to go away for the rest of your life by yourself. No one else is with you. You're going to go to like, let's say, an island. You can take one book with you. What book are you taking with you?
Oh, the Bible.
All right, I figured you were going to say that. You can put one restaurant on the island. What restaurant are you going to put on there that you can go to?
Five Guys.
Five Guys. Well, I like that one too. All right, and you're allowed to take a movie with you. What movie are you taking with you?
Dreamgirls.
Dreamgirls. All right.
Yeah.
And then you're allowed one trip.
One trip.
One trip for a week. Where in the world do you go?
Oh boy, one trip for a week.
Yep.
Oh man, that one's difficult. I'd want to visit Japan.
Why Japan?
I feel like there's a good mixture of culture and nuance for me there. Just because it's different enough and it's far away enough from what I'm already used to here. And I like going to places that challenge me culturally. Yeah,
so you're right. Because you've seen America, you've seen all the all that. You know Spanish, you know that, right? Yeah, it's either that or then Africa. I feel like to me, like it's like Africa somewhere in a jungle.
Yeah,
you know, which is probably closer to El Salvador, right? More, you know, just the skin color is probably a little bit different, but other than that, it's probably not as far. But Japan's like a combination of foreign but America, right? Like it probably
a little bit.
But my buddy Mikey Trompetta just is visiting there right now. We're airing his episode tomorrow, and then I have a friend in the V-Friend. I met him in the V-Friends community, and I have a friend named Emil Gorgis, and he's in real estate, and he was Iranian born, I think Iranian or Iraqian, I can't remember. I think it's Iranian. He then emigrated to Australia, and then he went from Australia to Japan, and now he's a real estate agent in Japan.
Cool,
and I think he's married to a Japanese lady, if I'm not mistaken. But it's interesting. That's what I love about NFTs, and I love about this community is you get to meet all kinds of different people. I've never got to meet so many diverse people in my entire life, and that's why I'm so passionate about NFTs. Last question about the island. You're allowed to visit. One person's allowed to come and hang out with you for 24 hours. It can be someone past, present, future, celebrity, famous, somebody that you know personally. Who's that one person?
My wife. I mean, you mean other than like somebody close to you?
No, you can pick anybody you want. Anybody you want. One person. So it's your wife.
I'd want to, that I know that is here. In the past, I would have, of course, liked to sit down with Jesus and hear. That's like really churchy. It's going to be like, oh, come on.
No, man. That. I think people that aren't even like churchy realize that Jesus was a man of great character. I would have wanted him to sit down with him. There's some questions I'd have for certain biblical characters like Noah and Abraham. Nowadays, I feel like if you have your Bible, don't you feel like you have enough Jesus? I'm just asking because I'm just trying to be strategic about this. Because if you have your Bible, I feel like you got Jesus, right?
Right.
So then it's like, all right, let's go. And I don't usually do this because it's always one question, but so let's take a person in the Bible. What Bible character would you want to spend 24 hours with? You only can pick one, man, and that's it. Yeah.
So I'd want to spend time with Paul.
Paul or David for me. Yeah, Paul or David.
Paul, because he did what I want to do. Where it's where the other apostles kind of stayed in their general vicinity.
Yeah. But Paul's on fire. He was on fire.
And he left and he did, and he went to places that nobody else would go, and he
had passion, he had purpose.
Right. So he was really driven. So I would want to sit down with him, and kind of pick his brain a little bit and see where he's at. Wisdom. I love truth. I want to know more truth, and wisdom is kind of one of those things that really attracts me. I want to know, those who are wise and understand what they see.
If people want to follow you, they want to connect with you after this podcast, after hearing all this stuff, the amazing things you have to say, what's the best way for them to get in touch with you?
So, Jorge@adventmarketing.org is my email. They can send me a message there. But they can check out my Facebook page, Advent Marketing, or @Advent Marketing, and they can see our videos there. We post every single day, just providing value.
Well, I appreciate it, man. You provided a lot of value for me, and I know the audience is really going to get a lot of value. If you got value out of this podcast, like it, subscribe, send me a comment. Let us know that you got some value out of this, because that's what helps keep me going. And I appreciate everybody. We'll see you guys next week.
Thank you for listening to the Big Fish Cares podcast.